This is Kathleen McGuigan, former editor of Architectural Record, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Returning podcast guest Stewart Hicks is best known for his wildly popular YouTube video series, Architecture with Stewart. And in his spare time, he's Associate Dean at the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Every few weeks, you'll find a new release helping educate the general public, which is us, on all sorts of topics, like why mall architecture makes us sad, what's the deal with people who want to live in corncob-shaped buildings, and the many ways your Roomba might be spying on you. And now, glaring suspiciously at his Roomba, here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Devices that talk to us, some by Wi-Fi, others with an actual voice, have been around for years. Who needs a refrigerator that can tell you how much food is in it? I guess somebody does, because they're selling a lot of them. With artificial intelligence, one day you'll just open up the fridge, reach for a piece of pie, and the fridge will say, "Hey, are you really going to eat that?" You won't be in shape for that important date next week if you keep this up, buddy.
I am rebooting that refrigerator.
I can't wait for this to happen, because then we'll see YouTube videos of people attacking their way too honest fridges. Back in the day, meaning the mid-century modern day, there were also state-of-the-art technologies that people were over the moon about to have in their houses. There was hi-fi, which for anyone born after 1990 means high fidelity. And it was a term applied to audio systems typically with solid-state circuitry, as opposed to old vacuum tubes. These hi-fi systems were put into walls, so a gentle push lowered the turntable in the living room, and a few buttons sent sound through speakers around the room or the entire house. There was also radiant floor heating, which, unlike typical forced air heating we all use now, was a method of shooting hot water through pipes in a concrete floor. The heat rose and the house got warmer, at least in theory. Radiant floor heating systems, when they worked, were much loved, but they often broke. It's rare to find a mid-century modernist house with one of these still intact, but it still does happen. Also, the room-to-room intercom system, which included both AM and FM radio.
FM stands for fine music.
Allowed you to talk to your children without having to actually go in their rooms. Clever children figured out how to switch off the speaker when mom and dad got too annoying. At least those intercoms weren't transmitting outside the house, or were they?
Oh.
Surely the 1950s CIA figured out a way to hack this. Now, please excuse me, I need to go disconnect my Roomba. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Returning guest Stewart Hicks leads design studios and lecture courses as an associate professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is also an associate dean in the College of Architecture, Design, and the Arts. Stewart is co-founder of the practice Design with Company, but he is best known for his wildly popular YouTube video series, Architecture with Stewart. Every few weeks, you'll find a new release on topics as varied as toilet design, the desperation of contemporary mall architecture, and the many ways your Roomba is spying on you. Welcome back to U.S. Modernist, Stewart.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Hey, Stewart, there have been some changes to your YouTube feed since we last spoke with you. I'm glad to see that the mustache is still in full effect, but you have made some changes.
Have I? What changes have you noticed?
Well, it's less frequent, and you are fully sponsored, so congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was making one a week, which was maybe during COVID times plausible, but then as I developed a little bit. I could see where a little extra time could make the videos better. Because when I first started, everything was just a tsunami of stuff, and I didn't know what I didn't know. So as soon as I got a little more comfortable, I thought, if I had more time, I think I know how I could best spend it. So I decided to go down to 1 every 2 weeks, and now that feels like too much. So
it's a lot of work.
Less frequent than that. It is a lot of work.
But you made a decision for quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think at first quantity is the way to go because I had a lot to learn, and as well as just getting comfortable with the process and putting things out. And then, over time, I think switching to quality over quantity, at least for me, seems to make more sense.
Stewart has got 99 videos now. As of this moment, he has over 373,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is a lot. And several of his videos have over 1 million views. In fact, there's one that has garnered, I think, 5.2 million views. Why linear cities won't work.
What's a linear city?
Well, that's my first question. So, Stewart, tell us about linear cities, just so people understand what that means.
Yeah. For almost as long as we started to think we could pre-design a city or, plan it out from the outset, the question of what shape it should take has been an important one. In the early days, they would just kind of grow organically. And then over time, as we start to plan them out, circles seem to be a pretty popular shape because it's the least amount of edge area to surface area. So you can kind of get it's most compact as it could be. But over time, when, transportation networks start to become major organizers for cities like railroads or highways, linear cities became a popular imagination frequenter. So even as early as the 1900s and things like that, people imagined what a linear city across the United States might be like, a little bit wider than, say, a highway or the train tracks, a big, long city that would be organized along that. And then over time, that kind of went in and out of favor. And most recently, we've seen the city being proposed and supposedly starting to be built called Neom, which is capturing the imagination of people on YouTube like no other, as evidenced by the amount of views it has. A very audacious project for, I think, 170 kilometers, some vast length through the desert of a city that would be the width of a traditional city block in a perfectly straight line.
Where is it?
It's going to be in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Oh, where they have lots of desert miles to work with.
That's right. And, people like Kevin Lynch and other city thinkers have thought about why we don't build linear cities too often, what their downfalls are, and what makes them very difficult. And so I kind of combed through some of that research and tried to present the traditional arguments against why linear cities are a difficult sell. They're just kind of inflexible. And they're also, when organized on a single transportation network, sort of reliant on that single, set of networks to not get clogged up and work. So there's a kind of lack of redundancy.
I would think that some parts of town are very, very far away from some other parts of town.
Exactly.
Well, let's give people a kind of basic overview of Neon. If you go online and look for photos of it, it is, the modernist dream, right? I mean, it is super modern architecture, the best, newest technology, transportation, everything working together. They're even predicting that AI is going to run a lot of these cities in terms of the infrastructure and making things go behind it. But one of the things, Stewart, I really love about your videos, and this one in particular, is that you help people understand the scale of this thing by some interesting graphics. So tell our listeners, actually how big Neom is.
Yeah, so I am located in Chicago, and I often use Chicago as a reference. And so people around here know how tall the Hancock Tower is, and the entire thing would be about the height of the Hancock Tower. It would be about the width of a traditional Chicago block, and about the length of from here in Chicago down to a little town called, I mispronounced it in the video and got a lot of flack for it, but I think it's called Hoopeston.
Hoopeston?
Which is
100 miles away, basically.
It's a long ways away.
Wow.
And I didn't even know about it, so never even heard of it or mispronounced it at least. So yeah, it's a pretty big endeavor, and it's meant to hold 9 million people, and that's about the population of Chicago. And if it works in certain ways, it's a real positive in the sense that it has a lot of density, so it wouldn't cover up so much land area as say that equivalent area of what Chicago would, but that comes at a pretty steep cost.
So it sounds like it's very tall, too.
Very, yes.
Very tall.
Wow.
If you've seen photos online of these giant cruise ships,
Yeah.
where you see it from the stern, from the back, and it has usually an amphitheater in the back that's open to two giant rows of cabins. Well, just imagine that the size of the Hancock Tower and as wide as a city block.
Yeah.
And you get an idea of the scale of this thing. Stewart, do you have any sense in researching this about why they want to do this?
Oh, boy. There's a lot of reasons why a spectacular city in the first place. I think there's different aspects of ways to answer that. One why would just be a new city for a large amount of people. Why would one need to house a large amount of people afresh? Another why would be, why do it in such a spectacular way? And another question would be, why there and why the line? I think a line is good at connecting things. So, it starts in a very specific area and, would maybe connect certain things. I think the spectacle of it's garnered a lot of attention, and I think that's an important part why. So I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I think you'd have to ask the planners and the money people exactly what their motivations are.
Well, speaking of money, how much does it cost to build a 100-mile-long building?
Oh, I don't even know. Billions and billions.
Trillions, I would guess.
Well, good thing you're working in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these buildings they're doing in New York and LA are easily getting to 500 million or a billion.
Oh, yeah.
And they're just taking up, a typical skyscraper space.
Right.
I mean, if you multiply that by 1,000 or 10,000, that's some serious digits there. That's beyond, what my calculator will handle.
Starts showing you it in a different way with all the zeros cropped out.
Yeah, 10 to E5 or something.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, so it's a massive project.
Before we talk about another one of your videos, I want to try a little experiment. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Stewart Hicks. He's not showing up here in the studio like Beetlejuice, Tom. What's going on?
I don't think he's here.
Yeah, this is not working. Now, Stewart, you're a huge fan of Beetlejuice.
I am. I think that movie, I saw it in the theaters more than any other movie I've ever encountered. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Well,
I mean, how could you not be?
Yeah. And that was what, 20 years ago, 25 years ago?
That's right. I was a youngin'. Yeah, I mean, it's so architectural too. Like, they live in a model. I mean, there's nothing more architectural than to model as a representation. And then the transformation of the house into this postmodernist, I don't know if you want to call it dream or nightmare. For me, it's a dream, but for many, it might be a nightmare. But yeah, that is one of my favorite films. And for how architectural it is, too. I even screened it for students at school one time and had a nice conversation about its merits architecturally.
Well, how exciting is it there's a sequel in the works?
I know. I'm paying close attention. I hope they do it well. The sequels these days, they can go either way.
You did a great video about horror films and architecture that looks at where modernism fits into the movie matrix. Tell us about that.
I struggled with the titling of that one. That's something that meta conversation, just kind of like how to package the stories around architecture. And that one, I looked at a few different films and tried from an architect's perspective, talk a little bit about how the tools of horror play out through the built environment. And I found that one of my favorite lines from that video is I said something like, I think the house is the primary unit of haunting, or I had a name for it, but
You
fact
said
that
it, right?
Yeah, I know. It was in October. The idea that the house is this like fundamental unit of haunting, that it's like, it's always this fixation, I think is really curious. And then just some of the amazing houses that appear in the horror genre for various reasons, I think is really fascinating. And what we find scary about different buildings, whether it's the attic or the basement or spaces in the walls, or, in Beetlejuice where you just have to draw a door and then you are transported into some other realm, I find really fascinating.
So the concept of a house having a personality.
Yes,
and
for sure.
A soul.
A soul. I even written a book about the idea of character in architecture, and that idea that it's sort of animated or it has a motivation, I think is really fascinating.
The only movie that really scared me that I watched was one 30, 40 years ago called The Amityville Horror.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. The house figures very prominently in that one.
Yeah, it had a personality.
And at some point, I remember the house talks to this couple and it goes, "Get out!"
Right. That's its big line.
And that house almost kind of has a face to it, too. It has like two windows. It's symmetrical on the end. It kind of looks like it embodies some sort of humanish form.
Another video that is hugely popular on your YouTube channel is called The Bewildering Architecture of Indoor Cities. Mm-hmm. It talks a lot about the subterranean worlds, and particularly something I had never heard of before called the Chicago Pedway.
Yeah.
It reminded me about that movie Parasite, the politics of, who is above ground and who is below ground. Was that a fun video to make?
Yeah, I think that was the first video to reach 1 million views. And I had no sense that one would be more popular than others. And so it was an interesting, just thing to watch how and why that one sort of resonated with folks in a particular way. And it was a blast to make. I think I made it around Thanksgiving time. And I visited 2 different spaces nearby Chicago. One, which you mentioned, the Pedway, which is a vast underground network of spaces where you can go from block to block to block underneath the city of Chicago. And then a building by John Portman here near Chicago, nearby the airport, who is known for vast atriums and interior spaces that are connected. And the one I visited is not one of his major works, which would be probably either LA or Atlanta. But the one in Chicago was good enough to kind of talk about how that space was sort of planned out from the outset. It had a very known shape. It's very symmetrical, and it's still a vast, large interior, but it's kind of planned from the outset, and you can kind of know where you are at all times because you can kind of see where you are relative to the rest of the building, versus the Pedway, which is this underground network of different kinds of spaces with all sorts of, smells and things that pop up. One of my favorite parts is where you go underneath, it's either a hotel or a gym, and there's a pool that looks right into this very public space where people are swimming all year round, and that area smells like chlorine. And it's a pretty interesting collision of urban situations, but all inside and all underground. And it's not the biggest in the world. There's other cities that have much larger underground networks. But using Chicago as this landmark of references for myself, I think try to stick with that when I can, to be able to show things that aren't always the exceptional version, but maybe just ones that don't seem so far away.
I remember back in the 70s when John Portman was at his peak, there was this disaster movie called The Towering Inferno with Paul Newman that was filmed inside of one of Portman's buildings. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I seem to recall that they were worried this was going to negatively affect Portman's career. And in fact, it had the opposite. It's that, everybody wanted more of these great atrium buildings going up, resulting in, I think, one of his biggest ones, which is the Marriott Marquis in New York City.
Right.
That's
fascinating.
Unbelievable building to go into.
I haven't been there, but that's a fascinating. I'm always fascinated with the way that media participates in the popularity of things, in really unexpected ways like that, or the fact that it's unpredictable, as you say, it went the opposite way, but at the same time, I don't know, like any kind of movie that features architecture really prominently, it seems like you're going to get an audience around that.
Did you ever see the movie The Lake House?
I have not.
So I have to put in a plug because this is one of my favorite movies. It was filmed about 17 years ago. We've done a couple shows on it. This was a movie to get Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock back together after the success of Speed.
Right.
And it's a love story about a modernist house that has a time-traveling mailbox.
That's right.
So
It came out in 2006.
yeah. So they put letters in the time-traveling mailbox, and it would send it 2 years in the future to Keanu, and Keanu would put a letter, and it would send it 2 years in the past to her.
Wow. And so they both lived in the house, but at different times?
At different times. And the house is spectacular. So we tracked down the architect for it, who was a production designer named Nathan Crowley. And we did a whole show with Nathan and the production designers and the engineers for the film. Fritz Henge was one of them.
And the house was built on a lake, purpose-built for the movie, right?
Yeah, it was.
And then they had to take it down?
What they did was get a nature preserve to give them use of a lakeside. They built the house, filled it in with water, shot the movie, and then because it was a nature preserve, they had to take it all out.
Wow.
They carved out the water so it would come up around the house. But
Interesting.
that is a movie you've really got to see as terms of making a building the star of a show.
Yeah, isn't he an architect too in that, Keanu?
Yes, he is. He's one of the few architects in movies.
That's right. I'm looking at a photo of it right now. It looks a lot like Philip Johnson's pavilion.
Right. Right.
His house, but just with some extra stuff on top.
Now, artificial intelligence you've touched on in several videos, particularly with a discussion of Roombas, which are spying on us. How does that work?
Yeah, artificial intelligence seems to be on everyone's mind these days, and there's just so many ways that it will be and is affecting the design of buildings, the way buildings work, the way we occupy buildings, in all sorts of different ways. And at the time of me working on that particular video, I wanted to investigate a little bit into the idea of maybe ways people hadn't thought about. And one of those is the fact that it's very difficult to get 3D data of the interiors of our homes for obvious reasons. You know, we don't let a lot of companies come in and 3D scan the interiors of our houses. But there are a couple companies that do that, and their primary mission is sold as providing other services, but they have publicly stated that one of their biggest assets is the fact that they have 3D data about the interiors of homes. And Roomba is one of them.
iRobot,
and the other
is
is
the company. Yeah.
And the other is Matterport, who creates those
sure.
3D tours of our real estate. And, you know, they really believe that the fact that they have this vast amount of 3D data of the world is their resource. And, I think it's an interesting way to think about these things in those terms. And so the video just tries to shed light on how much those two things in particular know about our environments in ways that we probably don't consider all that often. So the Roomba is going around scanning things.
Now, I own a Roomba, and they go to great lengths to try and convince you
I
that,
do too.
that imagery never goes up to the cloud.
Right.
Now, it may be really basic imagery, but it's more than the crook down the street has.
That's right. And even if it's not specific images, just the data of where things are, how things are arranged and stuff, is sort of baked into its architecture, because it's using AI to identify objects and photos and determine whether to move through it or not move through it. So it's got a lot of data that's based on imagery that isn't exactly the same as the image. And I don't quite know where all that goes, but
if I could just get the AI to quit getting tangled up in the extension cord, that's what happens every time. It's smart till it's not.
One question I had about AI on the production side, Stewart, and particularly kind of when your role is teaching, are we already at the point where I can go to some AI engine and say, hey, design me a men's bathroom with 3 urinals and 4 stalls, and then 5 minutes later have a complete set of plans for it?
I don't think it would be 5 minutes even. I mean, I think that there's stuff baked into, I don't know of anything that's super publicly accessible and integrated as of now, but as far as tools I've seen as experiments, for sure. I mean, I think there's only so many ways to arrange a typical bathroom, or even, like an apartment. A lot of that can be written or scripted, even if it's not AI, just with algorithms, which are certainly present in things like Reddit and stuff like that.
I'm interested because I see a lot of architects and the architecture profession complaining about AI, but I can't help but think that particularly the large firms would be first in line to get this stuff to do the drudgery of bathrooms and stairwells and things like that in these buildings.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think AI has for quite a while been useful for structural engineering. I think there's quite a host of examples of AI being used to hone in on innovative structural solutions for buildings. It doesn't seem like it's so integrated as of now. Buildings bring in lots of different pieces and puzzles and simulations and things. So I don't know if it's how many things you can bring together, but it seems like only a matter of time where you can do that. But I think in isolation, there are experiments that solve a lot of the problems that go along with it. And you're right. I would imagine, in the same way that SOM, I was just looking at some imagery of SOM's computers from the 70s and how integral they were into thinking about it and how their wireframe animations were just the marvel of the day. And I can imagine, I'd have to imagine that the large firms would be very eager to learn how they can integrate these kinds of tools into their workflows.
Have we gotten to the point yet, and you would know particularly because you teach in this, where we can get full 3D holograms of buildings yet?
You mean like
Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars? Can we
like
see
a model?
Yeah, like a holographic model that appears on a table of a building.
Augmented reality, for sure. I don't know. Isn't Apple putting out some augmented reality glass or some headset today or something, I think?
You have to have a headset to see it, though.
I mean, unless I've seen other things where it's like spinning lights, like spinning LEDs. So they spin and you see that, or something projected on glass or smoke or something. It seems like you always need some sort of medium.
Makes the light reflect.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But in that case, for sure.
Another thread in your video library seems to be kind of personal. So I have to ask you, Stewart, has an EV charging station harmed you in some way? Because you seem to have very negative opinions about them.
So something about packaging on YouTube, you have to make it sound dramatic.
Yeah.
Make it like clickbait.
Caveman speak is what we talk. We say, like, you got to really simplify it so as to resonate with folks in a because you only have a split second for people.
Charging stations bad.
That's right, exactly. Cavemen do not like EV charging stations.
They never have.
Yeah.
They never have, from the beginning. No, but I think we could all agree that they could be better. You see them floating around a parking lot somewhere. I don't currently own an EV, but you see them sort of straggling out in the middle of a parking lot somewhere, and it's just kind of uneventful. And it just seems like as part of, we're all thinking about how the EV infrastructure has to be more and more robust so that EV cars can be the norm.
Right. Electric utilities are thinking about that because it puts a much bigger burden on the grid.
Yes, for sure. And I guess my only call is for us to think about it, not as just the problem of getting power to those places, but also the fact that these are part of our environment, part of our built environment, part of our aesthetic experience overall. And I think we could do better to think about how to leverage these constructions, which are definitely going to be a bigger part of our everyday lives and a bigger part of our environment, and really think about what they're doing to it architecturally.
How to make them pretty?
How to make them work
pretty,
at all.
Maybe how to imagine public space around them might be a positive thing. Like right now, the fact that they're out in a parking lot doesn't really help anyone. What do? You put them next to a store. You maybe go shopping.
Right. It's not a destination.
not a destination at all. And maybe we could couple it with ways of being in a public space in ways we haven't even conceived of yet.
My complaint about EV charging stations is the same complaint I have about automated parking facilities, is that you're in a new city, you drive downtown, you pull into a parking lot, there's nobody there. The attendant is long gone. That's an archaic notion now.
Or they're out behind the garage getting high.
Yeah. So you've got to go to this thing. You've got to figure out how it works, download an app usually.
Yeah.
You've got to register yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can't even begin to pay to parking the car until you've done all that.
Right.
So you're 15 minutes standing there like an idiot trying to get your car parked. And it's the same for EV charging stations that you're not on their network. You're new to it.
Yeah, it's like once you've developed a new habit for it, maybe it seems intuitive, but that if you parked there every day, you're using that app every day and it's fine. But that's something I talk about in the video. It's just like it's new to us and we haven't established what those protocols and parameters are quite yet. You know, you go to a gas station, you kind of know how it's going to work. But even then, when I go to a state which is all full service at a gas station, I feel a little anxious. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to get out of the car?
You mean like New Jersey?
Yeah,
right.
That's right. When you go to New Jersey or Oregon, you know, I think that those expectations around it, I agree, need to, I don't know, be synthesized in some way so that people feel more comfortable.
There's also a security angle here because, say, if you're in a new town and you want to use the parking deck and you have to download the app and you have to create an account and then you enter your credit card number so you can park a few days. I was in Iceland last fall and rented a car and signed up for, Iceland Park or something like that. And every couple of weeks for the next few months on my credit card, there was a little charge from Easy Park, Iceland. And this is like weeks after I'd come home and I could call the credit card company. And after the third time, they got on it and it was a fraud issue.
Wow.
I don't know if they think that maybe I'm not going to catch the little tiny charge, except it's in Iceland. And
Yeah, you're going to notice.
Yeah, I didn't go park in there last week.
Stewart, we have just gone through a pandemic. You may have heard of that. And as one of the many outcomes of that, a lot of office buildings emptied out and haven't filled back up. So how do we use those office buildings again? Because many people have suggested using them as housing, but the developers are saying it's too expensive to convert them to housing. Is that true?
Wow, that's a big question that's facing us today. And it's also, I think, linked to how quickly do we want to jump on something? You know, the fact that it's empty this year doesn't mean that it's going to be for forever. And I think that, you know, obviously the nature of work has changed coming off the pandemic, and even the nature of cities have changed. People are, by working remotely, maybe moving to less dense, less expensive locations. And so I think cities are really trying to rethink what to do with this infrastructure of office spaces that it has. And
let's go build everything in a long line.
Yes, right. That's the only obvious solution, right?
Right. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think housing is one option, and it depends on the building type. So older office buildings, which have a smaller footprint, which have operable windows, may be more easily converted versus a large tower with a large footprint with not operable windows. I just recently saw a speculation, I think it was through SOM again, where they speculated on how you could carve part of a tower away so that you could create more jogs in the outer part of the building in order to turn offices to living spaces. The living space, every bedroom needs to have two means of egress, has to have operable windows and things like that. And there's a set of buildings in downtown Chicago here on LaSalle, which are just slated to go to residential. But here in cities, there's a mass of people already. There's some options for these places. But if you go out a little ways, there are a lot of places like office parks that just aren't useful anymore in the way that they used to be. And, how can we reuse them? I think is a really big question that's not easily answerable, because maybe there isn't the same economic pressure to reuse it, but maybe they offer a really great resource for something else. So, there's examples like Bell Labs in New Jersey, which successfully turned into a kind of mixed use kind of place And then even nearby here in Chicago, there's a pretty incredible office park that's being sold, and the question of what's going to happen with it, I think it's slated to get turned into data center. And I think that seems plausible for some places, but in some cases, office parks have some pretty unique conditions that might offer, again, new kinds of public space, or maybe not just be something that just serves the infrastructural needs, but also could be some of our humanity's greater needs.
Now, when you're teaching, what are the students of today most concerned with? What are they most interested in? I know that back in the 60s, architecture students thought they were going to solve all the racial issues and all the disparities in wealth through public housing, and we know that didn't work out so well. So what are the ideals of today's architecture student?
Oh, boy. If I knew that. I don't know if I'd be a rich person, but I could reach these kids. There's different conversations. I think one really important one is, a real close examination of our work, the way we work today, and the interning process, or the idea that architecture is a 24/7 life commitment, and the problems of labor exploitation. So I think that students are very concerned about that and want to make a change there.
They're unionizing, right? There's one, maybe two.
They're unionizing, yes. So I think that's a pretty fundamental thing that I think a lot of people entering the workforce are very, very concerned about. Topics-wise, I think it runs the gamut. There's probably as many things as there are students. I think what you said about the 60s is probably still somewhat true.
Okay.
I think climate change is a big concern, like a very visceral concern for many students. Students feeling like it's an immediate problem that architecture participates in, and they want to learn more about how to construct the built environment in a more thoughtful way around those issues. So yeah, it runs the gamut for sure.
Well, please put on your instructional agenda, Stewart, to encourage these students to learn how to return phone calls and respond to their email.
Oh, yeah?
Because I hear that from clients all the time. They're reaching out to architects to try to get them to design something for them, and they just don't hear back at all.
Oh, interesting.
Even sometimes for bigger projects, not just houses.
Wow.
There's a lot of customer service training that architects don't get.
Huh.
What, do you have to reach out to them on Discord or something?
That's right. On Tinder.
WhatsApp?
Yeah, right. Yeah, WhatsApp. Oh.
Just not speaking their language. You got to get on their platform.
Well, Stewart, this is delightful to talk to you again. You are a big success. We want to be you when we grow up. and thank you so much for spending time with us. You can find Stewart on YouTube all over the place. Great videos, 99 currently, and there'll be more coming your way. Thank you, Stewart.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, passing to you for the touchdown.
Yes! Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with Kelly Policelli on guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another high-fidelity, radiant heat edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.